Welcome to Story Tales. Please like this video and subscribe to Story Tales. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin.
The Pennsylvania woods stretched endlessly around 8-year-old Leora Kane as she scrambled to keep up with her parents' angry strides. Her small legs burned with exhaustion, but she dared not complain. Victor Kane's face had that dangerous red color it got when bills arrived in the mail, and Ramona's mouth was twisted into the bitter line that meant trouble. "This was supposed to be a nice family trip," Ramona hissed, jerking the heavy backpack higher on her shoulder. "Instead, we're dragging around dead weight." Leora stumbled over a root, catching herself before she fell. The hiking trail was rough, and her worn sneakers offered little grip on the loose stones. She had been excited when her parents announced the trip that morning. It was rare they did anything together as a family. "Mama, I'm trying to keep up," Leora said, her voice small. "Trying isn't good enough," Victor snapped, not bothering to look back. "You're slowing us down. We should have left you with Mrs. Patterson next door." The words stung, but Leora was used to them. She had learned early that her parents saw her as a burden, something that cost money they didn't have and required attention they didn't want to give. Still, she followed them deeper into the woods, hoping that maybe today would be different. The trail wound upward, and Leora's breathing became labored. Sweat dripped into her eyes, blurring her vision. When she wiped it away, she saw her parents had stopped ahead, their voices raised in another argument. "The rent is due tomorrow," Victor was saying, his hands clenched into fists. "And what do we have? Nothing. Less than nothing." "Don't blame me," Ramona shot back. "You're the one who lost the job at the factory. You're the one who gambles away what little we do get." "I wouldn't have to gamble if we didn't have so many expenses," Victor said, his eyes finding Leora. "School supplies, clothes she grows out of every month, food it never ends." Leora's stomach twisted. She knew they were talking about her, even when they pretended they weren't. She had heard similar arguments through the thin walls of their trailer late at night, when they thought she was sleeping. "Look at her," Ramona said, gesturing toward Leora with disgust, standing there with that stupid expression on her face. "She doesn't even understand what she's costing us." "I understand," Leora whispered, but neither parent heard her. The trail had brought them to a steep section, where the path curved along the edge of a rocky embankment. Below, the slope was covered with loose stones and scraggly trees. It wasn't a cliff, but it was steep enough to be dangerous. Victor pulled out a cigarette with shaking hands. "I can't take this anymore, Ramona. The stress, the bills, the constant worry. Something has to change." "Something like what?" Ramona asked, but her voice had a strange edge to it. They both looked at Leora, who was sitting on a fallen log, trying to catch her breath. The look in their eyes made her skin crawl. It wasn't the usual irritation or disappointment. It was something colder, calculating. "She's the problem," Victor said quietly. "She's always been the problem." Ramona nodded slowly. "We never wanted kids. Remember? We were going to travel, see the world. Instead, we got stuck with her." "Mama." Leora stood up, sensing the shift in the air. "Are we going home now?" Ramona's face twisted with rage. "Home? What home? We're about to lose the trailer because we can't afford anything with you around." "You're worthless," Victor added, his voice rising. "Just like everything we have to carry for you." Leora backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The embankment was behind her, her parents in front. "You want to know the truth?" Ramona's voice was shaking now, years of resentment pouring out. "We never loved you. You were an accident, a mistake. You ruined everything." The words hit Leora like physical blows, each one worse than the last. She had always known her parents didn't want her, but hearing it said out loud made it real in a way that stole her breath. "We could have been happy," Victor said, taking a step toward her. "We could have had a life." "Please," Leora whispered, but they weren't listening anymore. in a moment that seemed to stretch forever. Both parents moved toward her, not to comfort her, not to take back their words, but with something else entirely in their eyes. Victor's hand shot out first, shoving her hard in the chest. Ramona pushed from the side, throwing her off balance. Leora's feet scrambled for purchase on the loose stones at the edge of the trail, but there was nothing solid to grab onto. She tumbled backward, the world spinning as she rolled down the steep embankment. Rocks cut into her skin, tree branches scratched her face, and pain exploded through her small body as she bounced off obstacles on her way down. She came to rest at the bottom, her head striking a large boulder with a sickening crack. Blood ran into her eyes, and darkness crept in at the edges of her vision. Through the haze, she could hear her parents' voices from above. "Is she moving?" Ramona asked. "I don't think so," Victor replied. "Maybe we should check." "No." Ramona's voice was firm. "We can't be here when someone finds her. It has to look like an accident. What if she's not dead? Then someone else will deal with it. Come on, we need to go." Leora wanted to cry out, to tell them she was alive, but her voice wouldn't work. Her body felt broken, disconnected. She could only listen as their footsteps retreated, leaving her alone in the wilderness to die. The last thing she remembered before unconsciousness took her was the taste of blood and the certainty that her parents had thrown her away like garbage. When Leora opened her eyes, she was staring at white ceiling tiles. The antiseptic smell of a hospital filled her nostrils, and machines beeped steadily around her. Her head felt like it was splitting open, and her body ached in places she didn't know could hurt. "You're awake," said a gentle voice. Leora turned her head carefully and saw a woman sitting beside her bed. She had kind eyes and calloused hands, with graying brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore a faded dress that looked homemade but well-crafted. "Who are you?" Leora's voice came out as a croak. "My name is Maeve Harlow," the woman said. "I found you on the hiking trail. You've been unconscious for 2 days." The memories came flooding back her parents' cruel words, the push, the fall. Leora's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away. Crying wouldn't change anything. "Where are my parents?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Maeve's expression grew sad. "The police have been looking for them. They found your family's car abandoned at the trailhead, but there's been no sign of them. They think—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "They think there might have been an accident." Leora knew better. There had been no accident, not for her parents. They had left her to die and disappeared, probably to start over somewhere else without the burden of a worthless daughter. "The doctors say you have a concussion and some broken ribs," Maeve continued, "but you're going to be okay. The social worker will be by tomorrow to discuss what happens next." "Foster care," Leora said flatly. She had heard enough arguments between her parents to know how these things worked. Maeve leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Listen to me, child. I know what really happened to you. I can see it in your eyes, the same look I had when I was your age. Nobody just falls down an embankment like that, not without help." Leora stared at her, surprised by the woman's directness. "I grew up in a broken home too," Maeve said. "My father used his fists more than his words, and my mother looked the other way. I know what it's like to be thrown away." "Why are you telling me this?" Leora asked. "Because I also know what it's like to survive," Maeve said. "And I think you're a survivor too. The question is, what do you want to do about it?" Leora considered this. She was 8 years old, alone in the world, with parents who had tried to kill her. She could cry, feel sorry for herself, hope someone would take pity on her. Or she could do something else entirely. "I want to make sure they can never hurt me again," she said quietly. Maeve smiled for the first time since Leora had woken up. "Good. That's the first step." The social worker, a tired-looking woman named Janet Mills, arrived the next morning with a clipboard and a sympathetic expression that felt practiced. I'm sorry about your parents, Leora, she said, settling into the chair Maeve had vacated. The police are still investigating, but it looks like they may have had an accident after you fell. Without any relatives coming forward, we'll need to place you in foster care. Leora said nothing. She had already made her decision. I know this is scary, Janet continued, but we'll find you a nice family. I want to go with her, Leora interrupted, pointing to Maeve, who was standing quietly by the window. Janet looked confused. I'm sorry. Miss Harlow, Leora said. I want to live with her. Sweetie, that's not how it works, Janet said gently. Miss Harlow isn't an approved foster parent. She's just the person who found you. She saved my life, Leora said, her voice stronger now. That should count for something. Maeve stepped forward. I'd like to apply to be her guardian, she said. I know it's not conventional, but I have a stable home and income. I'm a seamstress. I work from home, so I can provide proper supervision. Janet frowned. The process takes months. Background checks, home visits, paperwork. Then let me stay with her while you do all that, Leora said. I'm not going anywhere else. There was something in the 8-year-old's voice that made both adults pause. It wasn't the pleading of a scared child, but the determination of someone who had already been through the worst and come out the other side. I'll need to make some calls, Janet said finally. 3 weeks later, Leora walked into Maeve's small apartment in Queens, New York. It wasn't much: 2 bedrooms, a tiny kitchen, and a living room that doubled as Maeve's sewing workshop, but it felt safer than anywhere Leora had ever been. This is your room, Maeve said, opening the door to a small space with a single bed, a desk, and a window that looked out onto the busy street below. It's not fancy, but it's yours. Leora set her small bag on the bed. Everything she owned in the world fit in that one bag. A few clothes, a worn stuffed animal she was too old for but couldn't abandon, and a small notebook she had found in the hospital gift shop. What do you write in there? Maeve asked, noticing the notebook. Things I don't want to forget, Leora said. She had already filled the first few pages with details about her parents, their names, what they looked like, the things they had said and done. She never wanted to forget how it felt to be called worthless and thrown away. Maeve nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. Are you hungry? I was about to make dinner. As they sat at the small kitchen table eating spaghetti with tomato sauce, a luxury meal compared to what Leora was used to, Maeve explained how their life would work. I make clothes for people in the neighborhood, she said. Wedding dresses, alterations, repairs. It's not a lot of money, but it's honest work. You'll go to school during the day, and when you get home, you can help me if you want to. Help how? Leora asked. Sorting buttons, organizing thread. Simple things at first. But if you're interested, I can teach you to sew. It's a skill that will always be useful, no matter what else you decide to do with your life. Leora thought about this. She had never been good at anything before her parents had made sure she knew that. But maybe, with Maeve, she could learn to be useful in a different way. I'd like that, she said, that night, as Leora lay in her new bed, listening to the sounds of the city outside her window. She made herself a promise. She would never again put herself in a position where someone could call her worthless and have it mean anything. She would become so valuable, so essential, that no one would ever be able to throw her away again. Her childhood had ended that day on the hiking trail. What grew in its place would be something harder, stronger, and infinitely more dangerous to anyone who tried to hurt her. School was a challenge, not because of the academics, but because of the other children. They sensed something different about Leora, the way she held herself apart, the hardness in her eyes that didn't belong in an 8-year-old's face. She didn't try to make friends, and she didn't join in their games. Instead, she watched. She noticed which kids had nice clothes and which ones were hand-me-downs. She saw how the popular girls moved, how they talked, what made others want to be around them. She studied fashion magazines left behind in the library, memorizing the shapes and colors that caught her home. She spent hours at Maeve's side, learning the basics of sewing. Her small fingers were surprisingly quick and precise, and she had a natural eye for what looked right. "You're gifted," Maeve said one afternoon as Leora finished a perfect hem on a practice piece. "I've never seen a child pick this up so fast." Leora didn't feel gifted. She felt driven. Every stitch was a step away from the helpless child who had been pushed down that embankment. Every skill she mastered was armor against a world that saw her as disposable. By the time she was 10, Leora was helping Maeve with real customer work. She could take measurements, pin alterations, and even complete simple repairs on her own. The customers began to know her name, to ask specifically for the little girl who does such neat work. "You have potential," one customer, Mrs. Rodriguez, told Maeve. "That girl could be a real designer someday." Leora overheard this conversation from the next room, and something stirred inside her. Not just the desire to be useful, but the ambition to be extraordinary. She began sketching in the margins of her school notebooks, not the cartoon drawings other kids made, but fashion designs. Dresses, jackets, skirts. She imagined how they would look on different body types, what fabrics would work best, how the pieces would move when someone walked. Her teachers noticed her artistic ability and suggested she join the art club, but Leora refused. Art club was for children who drew for fun. What she was doing was work, preparation for something bigger. "What do you want to be when you grow up?" her 6th grade teacher, Mr. Patterson, asked during a career day presentation. "Rich," Leora answered without hesitation. The class laughed, thinking she was joking, but Leora was completely serious. She had seen what poverty could do to people, how it made them desperate, cruel, willing to throw away their own children. She would never be poor, never be vulnerable, never be at anyone's mercy again. By the time she was 14, Leora had outgrown her role as Maeve's assistant. She was creating original designs now, sketching elaborate gowns and tailored suits that were beyond their current capabilities to make, but which showed remarkable sophistication for someone her age. "These are beautiful," Maeve said, flipping through Leora's latest sketchbook, "but they're also expensive to make. The fabrics alone would cost more than most of our customers can afford." "Then we need different customers," Leora said matter-of-factly. Maeve looked at her carefully. The shy, broken child she had rescued 6 years ago was gone, replaced by someone with sharp eyes and sharper ambitions. It wasn't necessarily a bad thing survival required strength, but sometimes Maeve worried about what Leora was becoming. "There's more to life than money," she said gently. "Like what?" Leora asked. "Love? Family? We both know how that turned out for me." "Not everyone is like your parents," Maeve said. Leora's expression didn't change. "Most people are exactly like my parents. They just hide it better." That same year, Leora got her first real job. Mrs. Chin, who owned a fabric store in Manhattan, needed someone to work after school and weekends. Leora took the subway into the city every day, learning about different textiles, suppliers, and the business side of fashion. She was quiet and efficient, never late, never complaining about the long hours or the repetitive tasks. Mrs. Chin began to rely on her for more than just stocking shelves. Leora had opinions about which fabrics to order, which suppliers offered the best deals, and how to arrange the displays to attract customers. "You think like a businesswoman," Mrs. Chin told her. "That's rare in someone so young." Leora saved every penny she earned. She had plans for that money, plans that went far beyond helping Maeve pay the rent. She was building something, piece by piece, stitch by stitch. A T16. She was altering clothes for her classmates, charging fair prices but never undervaluing her work. Word spread quickly. Leora Kane could make any outfit look like it was custom-made. Girls who had ignored her for years suddenly wanted to be her friend, at least long enough to get their prom dresses fitted. She was polite to them, but distant. These were the same people who had watched her eat lunch alone for years, who had whispered about her second-hand clothes and her lack of parents. Now they needed her skills, but that didn't make them friends. You don't have to be so cold to everyone, Maeve said one evening as they worked together in companionable silence. Some of those girls genuinely seem to like you. They like what I can do for them, Leora corrected. That's not the same thing. She had learned to see people clearly without the romantic notions that led to disappointment. Everyone wanted something, and everyone was willing to use you to get it. The trick was to make sure you were getting something better in return. By 18, Leora was working full-time at the fabric store while finishing her high school diploma through night classes. She had saved enough money to think about her next move, the step that would take her from useful to indispensable. I don't need to be liked, she told Maeve one night as they sat in their small kitchen, sharing a simple dinner. I just need to be unstoppable. Maeve looked at the young woman she had raised, seeing the determination that had kept her alive and the hardness that had kept her safe. She worried sometimes that Leora was building walls too high to ever come down, but she also understood why those walls were necessary. Just remember, she said quietly, being strong doesn't mean you have to be alone. Leora nodded, but in her heart she knew better. She had been alone since the day her parents pushed her down that embankment. Everything she had built since then was proof that she didn't need anyone, not for love, not for approval, not for anything. Soon, she would show the world exactly what someone they had called worthless could become. The fashion competition was small, held in a converted warehouse in Brooklyn with maybe 50 people in attendance. Leora stood among the other contestants, most of them art school students with expensive portfolios and designer clothes. She wore a simple black dress she had made herself and carried her designs in a worn leather folder Maeve had given her for her 21st birthday. First time? Asked the girl next to her, a blonde with perfectly styled hair and a condescending smile. You look nervous. Leora wasn't nervous. She was focused. She had spent months preparing for this moment, creating a small collection using fabrics she had bought with employee discounts and sewing late into the night after her shifts at the fabric store. Something like that, Leora replied, not bothering with small talk. The judging process was brutal. Each contestant had 5 minutes to present their work and explain their inspiration. Most of the other participants told stories about art school projects or famous designers who had influenced them. When it was Leora's turn, she walked to the front of the room, carrying 3 garments that represented everything she had learned about fashion, business, and survival. My name is Leora Kane, she said, her voice clear and confident. These pieces are about transformation, taking something that others might see as worthless and proving them wrong. She displayed her work, a jacket made from repurposed wool that looked more expensive than pieces costing 10 times as much, a dress that used innovative cutting techniques to flatter any body type, and a skirt with hidden pockets and adjustable elements that made it both beautiful and practical. The judges leaned forward, intrigued. These weren't student experiments or artistic statements. They were professional quality garments that solved real problems for real people. Where did you study? Asked one judge, a woman Leora recognized from fashion magazines. I didn't, Leora said. I learned by doing. She won 3rd place, which came with a small cash prize and, more importantly, the attention of several people in the audience who might be useful to know. One of them was Clinton Vassell, the owner of a boutique in Soho, who approached her after the ceremony. Clinton was in his 50s with gray hair and an expensive suit that had seen better days. He moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone who had been in the fashion industry for decades. But Leora noticed the tiredness around his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands that suggested his best years were behind him. Your work is impressive, he said, extending his hand. I'm Clinton Vassell. I own a boutique in Manhattan. I know who you are, Leora said, accepting the handshake. She had researched every judge and notable attendee before the competition. You used to dress Broadway stars in the 80s. Clinton looked pleased that she had done her homework. Used to being the key phrase. The industry has changed, and I'll admit I haven't always changed with it, but I recognize talent when I see it. What are you offering? Leora asked directly. Clinton laughed, clearly surprised by her bluntness. Most people start with pleasantries. I'm not most people, Leora said. And neither are you, or you wouldn't be here talking to someone who came in third instead of the winner. Fair point, Clinton said. I'm offering you a job. Part-time to start, helping with alterations and custom work. It's not glamorous, but it would give you experience in the high-end market. Leora considered this. Working for Clinton would mean leaving the fabric store and the steady paycheck she had relied on for years. It would also mean taking a risk on someone she didn't know, in an industry that was notoriously unstable. I'll need to see your books, she said. Clinton blinked. Excuse me. Your financial records. I want to know if your business is stable enough to justify me leaving my current job. Most people would have been offended by such a demand from someone they had just met, but Clinton began to grin. You remind me of myself when I was your age, suspicious of everyone and everything. With good reason, I'd guess, Leora said. Indeed. Clinton pulled out a business card. Come by the shop tomorrow at 10. We'll talk. Clinton's boutique, Vassal and Company, occupied a narrow storefront between a gallery and a cafe in one of Soho's more expensive blocks. The exterior was elegant but understated, with a simple window display featuring 2 mannequins wearing clothes that were clearly high quality but not cutting edge. Inside, the store felt like stepping back in time. Rich fabrics, classic cuts, and a clientele that was distinctly upper middle-aged. It was exactly the kind of place Leora had expected. Successful in its day, but struggling to stay relevant, Clinton emerged from the back room as she entered, dressed in the same type of expensive but dated clothing that filled his racks. Punctual, he said approvingly. Good. Let me show you around. The tour was brief but informative. The boutique specialized in custom work for a loyal but aging customer base. The alterations business was steady, and there was still some demand for Clinton's original designs, but overall sales had been declining for years. The truth is, Clinton said as they sat in his small office, I need fresh blood. Someone who understands what younger customers want without abandoning the craftsmanship that built this place. And you think I'm that person? Leora asked. I think you might be, Clinton said. But first, let me tell you what this business is really like. Over the next hour, Clinton gave Leora an education in the realities of fashion that no school could have provided. He told her about the ruthless competition, the way suppliers would drop you for a bigger client without warning, the customers who would praise your work to your face and then badmouth you to their friends. Everyone smiles at the fashion shows, he said, but behind the scenes, people will steal your designs, poach your staff, and spread rumors about your finances if they think it will help them get ahead. You can't trust anyone completely. Then why stay in it? Leora asked. Clinton was quiet for a moment, then gestured toward the main showroom. Because sometimes, just sometimes, you create something that makes a person feel beautiful in a way they never have before. That's worth all the rest of it. Leora thought about this. She had felt that satisfaction when working on alterations for her classmates, seeing how the right fit could transform someone's confidence. But she had bigger ambitions than making people feel beautiful. What would you want me to do? She asked. Start with alterations and simple custom work, Clinton said. Learn the clientele, understand what they want and what they're willing to pay for. After that, if things work out, maybe we look at adding some of your designs to the line. How much? Leora asked. They negotiated for another 20 minutes. The salary was lower than what she made at the fabric store, but there was potential for commission on custom work. More importantly, it was an opportunity to learn the business from someone who had survived in it for 30 years. One condition, Leora said. I want to see everything. Not just the creative side, but the business side. Suppliers, pricing, marketing. If I'm going to work here, I want to understand how it all works. Clinton studied her for a long moment. Most designers just want to sketch pretty pictures and let someone else worry about the money. I'm not most designers, Leora said. No, Clinton agreed. You're not. Working at Vassal and Company was like getting a master's degree in fashion business. Clinton was demanding but fair, expecting perfection in her work while teaching her the subtleties of dealing with high-end customers. Mrs. Worthington has been coming here for 15 years, he explained as they prepared for the arrival of one of their most important clients. She spends $30,000 a year on clothes, but she's also the most difficult person you'll ever meet. She'll find fault with everything, demand impossible alterations, and then expect you to be grateful when she finally approves something. So why do we put up with it? Leora asked. Because she brings in 10 other customers who are just like her, Clinton said. And because in this business, reputation is everything. If Mrs. Worthington is unhappy, she'll make sure everyone in her social circle knows about it. When Mrs. Worthington arrived, a woman in her 60s with perfect makeup and an imperious manner, Leora watched Clinton transform. He became deferential without being servile, professional without being warm. He listened to her complaints with apparent sympathy, while subtly guiding her toward solutions that worked for both of them. "The hem is too long," Mrs. Worthington declared, examining a dress in the three-way mirror. "And the shoulders are wrong. The whole thing makes me look frumpy." Leora could see that the dress fit perfectly and was extremely flattering, but she said nothing. This wasn't about the dress, it was about power and attention. "We can certainly adjust that," Clinton said smoothly. "Leora, could you pin the hem where Mrs. Worthington would prefer it?" Leora knelt and began pinning, making tiny adjustments while Mrs. Worthington continued to complain. As she worked, she studied the woman's face in the mirror, noting the moment when genuine satisfaction flickered across her features. "Perhaps half an inch shorter in the back," Leora suggested quietly. Mrs. Worthington considered this, then nodded approvingly. "Yes, that's better. You have a good eye, dear." After Mrs. Worthington left, Clinton turned to Leora with admiration. "How did you know to suggest that?" "I watched her face," Leora said. "She liked how it looked, but she needed to feel like she was in control of the process. The extra quarter-inch gave her that." "Exactly right," Clinton said. "Understanding the customer is just as important as understanding fashion, sometimes more important." Over the following months, Leora absorbed everything Clinton could teach her. She learned about fabric sourcing, pricing strategies, and the delicate art of managing difficult personalities. She watched him handle suppliers who tried to raise prices without warning, competitors who attempted to poach his customers, and employees who thought they could slack off without consequences. "The fashion industry is built on relationships," Clinton explained one day as they reviewed orders from their fabric suppliers. "But every relationship is also a transaction. People will be loyal to you as long as it benefits them. The moment it doesn't, they'll move on to someone else." "Then how do you build something that lasts?" Leora asked. "By making yourself indispensable," Clinton said. "By being so good at what you do that losing you would cost them more than keeping you." This became Leora's philosophy. She didn't try to make friends with the other boutiques or schmooze with fashion editors. Instead, she focused on becoming excellent at every aspect of the business. She studied the competition, analyzed pricing structures, and developed relationships with suppliers that gave Vassal and Company access to better fabrics at lower costs. Her designs began appearing in the boutiques line, starting with simple pieces that complemented Clinton's more traditional work. Customer response was positive. Her clothes had a modern edge while maintaining the quality craftsmanship that Clinton's clientele expected. "You're ready," Clinton told her one day, nearly 2 years after she had started working for him. "Ready for what?" Leora asked. "To go out on your own," he said. "I can teach you how to run a boutique, but I can't teach you how to build an empire. That's something you'll have to figure out yourself." Leora had been expecting this conversation. She had learned everything Clinton had to offer, and they both knew it. The question was whether she was ready to take the risks that came with independence. "What happens to this place?" she asked, looking around the boutique that had been her classroom for the past 2 years. "I'll probably sell it," Clinton said. "Or maybe I'll just close it down. I'm tired, Leora. I've been in this business for 40 years and I don't have the energy to compete with 20-year-olds anymore." "Then don't compete," Leora said. "Hire them." Clinton looked at her with interest. "What are you suggesting?" "Partnership," Leora said. "You provide the experience and established customer base. I provide the energy and new ideas. We split the profits and the decisions." "That's not what you want," Clinton said with certainty. "You want to be in charge of your own destiny, not share it with someone else." He was right, of course. Leora had been planning her exit strategy since her first week at the boutique. But she also recognized Clinton's value, not just as a mentor, but as a connection to the established fashion world. "Consultation, then," she said. "I start my own place, and you advise me on the business side. In exchange, I refer customers who aren't right for my aesthetic, but would appreciate yours." "And what makes you think you'll have customers to refer?" Clinton asked with amusement. Leora smiled, and for the first time it reached her eyes. "Because I'm going to be unstoppable." Maison Leora opened in a small storefront in Manhattan's Garment District on a gray Tuesday in October. The space was tiny compared to established boutiques, but Leora had chosen it carefully: high foot traffic, reasonable rent, and room to expand if things went well. She had spent months planning every detail. The interior was minimalist but warm, with clean lines and careful lighting that made both the clothes and the customers look their best. The initial inventory was small but carefully curated pieces that showcased her range while staying true to her aesthetic of modern elegance with practical details. Maeve came to the opening, looking proud but worried. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" she asked, watching Leora make final adjustments to a window display. "I've been ready for years," Leora said. "The question is whether the market is ready for me." The answer came quickly. Within a week, Leora had her first celebrity customer, a Broadway actress who had heard about her work through Clinton's network. The actress bought 3 pieces and wore one to a high-profile premiere. Posting about it on social media, orders began coming in, first through word of mouth and then through the boutique's website. Leora had been careful to keep her online presence professional but personal, sharing the stories behind her designs and the craftsmanship that went into each piece. "You're getting noticed," Clinton said during one of his consultation visits. "Fashion Week is coming up. You should think about showing your work." "I'm not ready for Fashion Week," Leora said, "but I'm ready for something smaller." She organized her own show in the boutique, inviting fashion editors, bloggers, and potential customers to see her latest collection. The event was intimate but polished, with each guest receiving personal attention and detailed information about the clothes they were seeing. The response exceeded her expectations. Orders came in that night and continued for weeks afterward. Fashion bloggers wrote about her innovative use of traditional techniques, and several major department stores reached out about carrying her line. "The key is controlled growth," Clinton advised as they reviewed the offers. "Don't expand so fast that you lose control of quality or brand image." But Leora was thinking bigger than controlled growth. She was thinking about the difference between success and dominance, between having a business and building an empire. She began hiring carefully not just seamstresses and sales staff, but people who understood business, marketing, and the long-term strategy she was developing. She invested in better equipment, expanded her product line, and began developing relationships with suppliers who could handle larger orders. By her second year, Maison Leora was profitable. By her third year, it was thriving. Celebrities wore her designs to red carpet events, fashion magazines featured her work, and other designers began copying her innovations. "You've made it," Maeve said during one of their weekly dinners, looking around the expanded boutique with amazement. "I've made a start," Leora corrected. "This is just the foundation." She was 27 years old, successful beyond what most people achieved in a lifetime, but she wasn't satisfied. Success was protection against becoming vulnerable again, but it wasn't enough. She wanted power, the kind of power that meant no one could ever hurt her, dismiss her, or throw her away. That power was coming, sooner than she expected, in a form she had been both dreading and anticipating for nearly 20 years. It was a cold December afternoon when they walked through the door of Maison Leora. Leora was in the back office, reviewing designs for the spring line, when her assistant knocked. "There are customers asking about evening wear," the assistant said. "They seem particular about what they want." Leora sighed and closed her sketchbook. Particular customers usually meant difficult customers, and she had learned that handling them personally was often the most efficient approach. She walked into the main showroom and froze dar. Ramona and Victor Kane stood near the evening wear display, looking older and shabbier than she remembered, but still unmistakably her parents. Ramona was examining a black silk gown with greedy eyes, while Victor fidgeted uncomfortably, clearly out of place in the elegant surroundings. They hadn't seen her yet. Leora took a moment to study them, noting the worn clothing, the desperate way they were handling the expensive fabrics, the conversation they were having in low, urgent voices. "We can't afford anything here," Victor was saying. "Look at these prices." "We're just looking," Ramona replied, but her voice had the same bitter edge Leora remembered from childhood. "Besides, maybe whoever owns this place is feeling generous. Rich people love charity cases." Leora almost laughed at the irony. After 19 years, her parents had found their way back to her, looking for charity from the child they had tried to murder. She composed her face into a polite, professional expression and approached them. "Good afternoon. I'm Leora Kane, the owner of Maison Leora. I understand you're interested in evening wear." Ramona looked up, and for a moment Leora saw confusion flicker across her face. There was something familiar about the young woman in front of her, but she couldn't quite place it. "Yes," Ramona said, recovering her composure. "We're looking for something special. My husband has a business dinner coming up." Leora nodded as if this made perfect sense, though Victor looked like he hadn't worn a suit in years. "Of course. What's the occasion?" As they talked, Leora watched her parents carefully. They were desperate, that much was obvious from their body language and the way they kept glancing at price tags with barely concealed horror. But they were also trying to maintain some dignity, pretending to be potential customers rather than people who were clearly struggling. "This is beautiful," Ramona said, touching the black gown with reverence. "Who owns this place? They must be very successful." "I do," Leora said simply. "And I am." Something in her tone made Victor look up sharply. He studied her face with the same intensity she was using on him, and she saw the moment when recognition began to dawn. "Do we know you from somewhere?" he asked slowly. Leora smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Do you remember me?" The color drained from both of their faces as the pieces finally fell into place. The woman standing in front of them, successful and confident and very much alive, was their daughter. The child they had pushed down an embankment and left for dead 19 years ago. "Leora!" Ramona whispered, and the word came out like a prayer. "Hello, Mother," Leora said, her voice perfectly calm. "Hello, Father. It's been a long time." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Victor's mouth opened and closed without sound, while Ramona gripped the black gown so tightly her knuckles turned white. Other customers moved through the boutique around them, unaware of the family drama unfolding near the evening wear. "You're alive," Ramona finally managed to say. "Disappointed?" Leora asked, her tone conversational, but her eyes cold as winter steel. "No, of course not," Victor stammered. We hoped, but when the police couldn't find you." "The police couldn't find me because a kind woman took me in," Leora said. "After someone pushed me down that embankment and left me to die." "It was an accident," Ramona said quickly, but the word sounded hollow even to her. "Was it?" Leora asked, because I remember it differently. I remember being called worthless. I remember being told I was a mistake that ruined your lives. I remember the look in your eyes right before you pushed me. Neither parent could meet her gaze. They stood in the middle of her successful boutique, surrounded by the evidence of everything she had built from nothing, and they couldn't find words to defend themselves. But that's in the past, Leora continued, her voice shifting to a warmer, more welcoming tone. You're here now, and you're clearly in need. Perhaps I can help. Victor and Ramona exchanged glances, hope flickering in their eyes. They had expected anger, accusations, maybe even violence. They hadn't expected forgiveness. We've had some hard times, Ramona said carefully. Victor's health isn't what it used to be, and finding steady work has been difficult. I can see that, Leora said, taking in their worn clothes and desperate expressions. Why don't we go to my office? We can talk more privately there. She led them through the boutique to her office in the back, a spacious room with a large desk, comfortable chairs, and windows overlooking the busy street. The walls were covered with sketches, fabric samples, and photographs of her designs being worn by celebrities and socialites. Please sit, Leora said, settling behind her desk. Tell me what's been happening in your lives. The story came out in pieces, interrupted by justifications and excuses. After leaving Pennsylvania, Victor and Ramona had drifted from place to place, taking odd jobs and running small scams. Victor's drinking had gotten worse, leading to arrests and lost opportunities. Ramona had worked in diners and retail stores, but her bitter personality made it difficult to keep jobs for long. They were currently living in a rented room in Queens, behind on rent and facing eviction. Victor needed medical care they couldn't afford, and Ramona's job at a discount store barely covered food and basic expenses. We saw your boutique in a magazine, Ramona said. The article said you were from Pennsylvania originally, and when we saw your name, you thought maybe I'd be willing to help my loving parents, Leora finished. We know we weren't perfect, Victor said, his voice shaking. We were young, stressed about money. We made mistakes. Mistakes, Leora repeated thoughtfully. Is that what we're calling attempted murder now? It wasn't murder, Ramona protested. We would never have hurt you intentionally. Leora leaned back in her chair, studying their faces. They actually seemed to believe their own lies, had probably been telling themselves this story for so long that they'd convinced themselves it was true. Tell me about your debts, she said, changing the subject. They looked confused by the shift, but desperation made them honest. They owed money to landlords, credit card companies, medical providers, and several less legitimate lenders. The total was substantial enough that they would never be able to pay it off with their current income. How much do you need to get back on your feet? Leora asked, hope flared in their eyes. Maybe 20,000. Victor said hesitantly. Leora nodded as if this was a reasonable request. That's quite a lot of money. We'll pay you back, Ramona said quickly. With interest. Whatever you think is fair. I'm sure you will, Leora said. But first, I'll need to understand your financial situation better. I can't just hand over that kind of money without proper documentation. She called in her assistant and introduced her parents as potential business partners who needed a loan. Could you arrange for our accountant to review their finances? I want to make sure any agreement we make is properly structured. Her assistant nodded and began making arrangements. Within an hour, Victor and Ramona found themselves in a conference room with Nico Aldrin, Maison Leora's sharp-eyed accountant, who had been carefully selected for this role. Nico was young, ambitious, and completely loyal to Leora. He had been with the company since its early days, when loyalty was repaid with opportunity and growth. He also had a talent for finding information that people preferred to keep hidden. This is just standard due diligence, Leora explained to her parents. Nico will need to see your tax returns, bank statements, any outstanding loans or debts. It's all confidential, of course. Of course, Victor agreed, too desperate to question why a simple family loan required such extensive documentation, as Nico worked with her parents. Leora returned to her office and placed a call to a private investigator she had used for other business matters. "I need complete background checks on Victor and Ramona Kane," she said. "Employment history, criminal records, current debts, and anyone they might owe money to. I want to know everything." The investigation revealed that Victor and Ramona's situation was even worse than they had admitted. They owed money to loan sharks in addition to their legitimate debts, and Victor had a gambling problem that had led to threats of violence. They were desperate not just for help, but for survival. Over the following weeks, Leora played her role perfectly. She provided small amounts of money when they asked, enough to keep them afloat, but not enough to solve their problems. She listened to their stories with apparent sympathy, offered advice about budgeting and finding work, and slowly made herself indispensable to their survival. "You're so generous," Ramona said during one of their meetings. "We don't deserve your kindness, especially after the way things ended when you were little." "Everyone deserves a second chance," Leora replied, handing her an envelope with enough cash to cover their rent for another month. "Family is family, right?" The word family felt strange in her mouth, but her parents grabbed onto it desperately. They began calling her regularly, asking for advice and help with increasingly minor problems. They brought her small gifts they couldn't afford and talked about how proud they were of her success. "We always knew you were special," Victor said one afternoon as they sat in a coffee shop near the boutique. "Even when you were little, you had that spark." Leora nodded and smiled, while inside she catalogued every lie, every desperate attempt to rewrite history. They were so eager for her forgiveness, so grateful for her help, that they would believe anything she told them. Through Nico's careful documentation, she learned exactly who they owed money to and how much. She learned about Victor's gambling debts and Ramona's shoplifting arrests. She learned that they had been evicted from 3 different apartments in the past 2 years, and that Victor had been fired from his last job for showing up drunk. Most importantly, she learned that they were exactly the same people who had thrown her away 19 years ago, selfish, desperate, and willing to use anyone who showed them kindness. "They're completely dependent on you now," Nico reported during one of their private meetings. "Without your help, they'd be homeless within a month." "Good," Leora said. "That's exactly where I want them." The 1-year anniversary of Maison Leora's opening was approaching, and Leora decided to celebrate with a gala event. She rented space in one of Manhattan's most prestigious hotels, invited fashion editors, celebrities, and important clients, and planned an evening that would establish her boutique as a permanent fixture in the New York fashion scene. "This is going to be expensive," Nico warned as they reviewed the budget. "It's an investment," Leora replied. "Success isn't just about making good clothes. It's about making people believe that buying from you makes them part of something exclusive." She sent invitations to all the important people in her professional life, but she also sent 2 special invitations to a rented room in Queens. Victor and Ramona received elegant cards inviting them to attend as special guests of the designer. "We can't go to something like that," Ramona protested when they called to thank her. "We don't have the right clothes, and we'd just embarrass you." "Nonsense," Leora said. "You're my family. I want you there to share in this success." She arranged for them to borrow appropriate clothing from the boutique's formal wear collection, had them picked up in a car service, and made sure they were seated at a prominent table near the front of the room. The gala was everything Leora had planned it to be: elegant, sophisticated, and attended by everyone who mattered in New York fashion. Models wore her latest designs, champagne flowed freely, and the atmosphere buzzed with the energy of people who knew they were at an important event. When it came time for speeches, Leora stood at the podium looking out at a room full of successful, influential people. She wore a black dress of her own design, simple but perfectly cut, with jewelry that caught the light in subtle ways. She looked like exactly what she was: a woman who had built something extraordinary through her own talent and determination. "A year ago," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the room, "I opened Maison Leora with a simple belief that everyone deserves to feel beautiful and powerful in their own skin." The audience murmured approvingly. This was the kind of inspirational message they expected from successful entrepreneurs. But the truth is, Leora continued, this boutique exists because someone once told me I was worthless. The room grew quieter, sensing that this speech was taking an unexpected turn. I was 8 years old when I learned that the people who were supposed to love me saw me as nothing more than a burden. I learned that love can turn to cruelty in an instant, and that the word family doesn't always mean protection. She could see her parents at their table, Victor's face pale and Ramona's eyes wide with growing alarm. I was pushed down an embankment and left to die by people who thought I was too worthless to live. But they forgot something important. Leora's voice grew stronger, filled with the conviction of someone who had turned pain into power. They forgot that sometimes the things you throw away become more valuable than anything you choose to keep. The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Those who tried to bury me forgot that I was a seed, Leora said, looking directly at her parents. And seeds, when properly tended, grow into something magnificent. The applause was thunderous, but Leora barely heard it. She was watching her parents' faces, seeing the exact moment when they realized they had been exposed. Victor started to stand, as if he might try to leave, but Ramona grabbed his arm and pulled him back down. People around them were putting the pieces together, whispering among themselves as they looked from the speaker to the ashen-faced couple at the prominent table. No one said anything directly, but the speculation was obvious. After the speech, people approached Victor and Ramona with curious expressions, making polite conversation while clearly fishing for information. The older couple sat frozen, unsure whether to deny everything or try to explain. "Wonderful speech," said Mrs. Worthington, the difficult customer Leora had learned to handle at Clinton's boutique. "So inspiring to see someone overcome such tragedy. You must be very proud of your daughter." Ramona opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Victor managed a sickly smile and nodded, but his hands were shaking. Leora watched from across the room, accepting congratulations from other guests while keeping her parents in her peripheral vision. They were trapped, unable to leave without causing more of a scene, unable to stay without enduring more speculation and barely veiled accusations. When the evening finally ended, Victor and Ramona waited for everyone else to leave before approaching Leora. She was talking with the catering staff, making sure everything was cleaned up properly, when they appeared beside her. "We need to talk," Victor said quietly. "Of course," Leora replied pleasantly. "My office tomorrow at 10. "Tonight," Ramona said, desperation creeping into her voice. "We can't wait until tomorrow." Leora looked at them with apparent concern. "Is everything all right? You both look upset." "You know exactly what's wrong," Victor said, his voice barely controlled. "That speech you told everyone about my childhood?" Leora asked innocently. "I thought it was inspiring. Everyone seemed to enjoy it." "You made it sound like we tried to kill you," Ramona whispered. "Did I?" Leora asked. "I don't remember mentioning anyone by name." But they all knew the damage was done. By tomorrow, the story would be all over the fashion world. Leora Kane, the successful designer whose parents had tried to murder her as a child. Some people would express sympathy, others would whisper with fascination, but everyone would remember. "What do you want from us?" Victor asked, and for the first time, Leora heard fear in his voice. She looked at these two pathetic people who had once had the power to hurt her, who had called her worthless and thrown her away like garbage. Now they stood before her success, begging for mercy they had never shown. "I don't want anything from you," she said calmly. "I never did." Within a week, the calls stopped coming. Victor and Ramona no longer asked for loans or advice or help with their problems. Leora's accountant Nico confirmed that she had cut off all financial support, but she hadn't made any formal announcement. She simply stopped taking their calls and responding to their increasingly desperate messages. "They're asking around about you," Nico reported. trying to find mutual acquaintances who might intercede on their behalf. And Leora asked, "No one wants to get involved. Your reputation in the industry is too important for people to risk it by helping your parents." Without Leora's support, Victor and Ramona's situation deteriorated rapidly. The loan sharks they owed money to were not patient creditors, and the legitimate debts continued to accumulate interest and penalties. Victor's health problems worsened under the stress, leading to an expensive hospital stay they couldn't afford. Leora heard about their troubles through the network of people who made it their business to know everything that happened in their small corner of the world. She felt no satisfaction in their suffering, but no regret either. They had made their choices 19 years ago, and now they were living with the consequences. "Don't you think this has gone far enough?" Maeve asked during one of their weekly dinners. She had heard the rumors, seen the newspaper gossip about Leora's family drama, and she was concerned about the hardness she saw growing in her adopted daughter. "Has what gone far enough?" Leora asked. "The revenge," Maeve said gently. "I know they hurt you terribly, but destroying them won't change what happened." "I'm not destroying them," Leora replied. "I'm simply no longer enabling them." "There's a difference." "Is there?" Maeve asked. "You helped them just long enough to make them dependent on you. Then you cut them off when they needed you most. That sounds like deliberate cruelty to me." Leora set down her fork and looked at the woman who had saved her life, who had given her everything she needed to become successful. Maeve was kind and generous and believed in second chances, which made her fundamentally unable to understand what Leora had become. "They left me to die, Maeve," Leora said quietly. Not in a moment of anger, not by accident, but deliberately. They looked at their 8-year-old daughter and decided she was better off dead. "I know," Maeve said, "and that was unforgivable. But becoming like them isn't the answer." "I'm nothing like them," Leora said. "They were weak and cruel and stupid. I'm strong and successful and smart. That's why I won." "Won what?" Maeve asked. "What exactly have you won?" Leora gestured around them, encompassing not just the expensive restaurant where they were eating, but everything she had built. Everything. Security, respect, power. The ability to make sure no one can ever hurt me again. "And is it worth it?" Maeve asked, "living with that much anger in your heart?" "It's not anger anymore," Leora said honestly. "It's just reality. Some people deserve to suffer, and some people deserve to thrive. I've made sure I'm in the second group." The final news came 6 months later. Victor Kane had died of heart failure in a charity hospital, alone because Ramona couldn't afford to take time off work to be with him. She was living in a homeless shelter now, having lost their room when she couldn't make the rent without Victor's disability checks. Leora learned about it from a brief newspaper obituary that mentioned Victor's survivor, his wife Ramona, and his estranged daughter, successful fashion designer Leora Kane. She read it while sitting in her office on the top floor of a new building she had purchased to house her expanding business empire. Through her windows, she could see Fifth Avenue stretching out below her, busy with people who wore her designs or aspired to wear them someday. Maison Leora was no longer just a boutique, it was a brand, a lifestyle, a symbol of success that competitors tried to copy but could never truly replicate. Her latest collection was being featured in Vogue. Department stores competed for exclusive arrangements with her company. She had been invited to show at Paris Fashion Week, the ultimate validation for any designer. Standing there in her glass office, looking out at the city she had conquered, Leora thought about that day on the hiking trail 19 years ago. She could still hear her mother's voice calling her worthless, still feel the moment of falling through space before the world went dark. The word worthless had lost all power over her. It had become fuel instead of poison, driving her to heights her parents could never have imagined when they threw her away. She had never visited Victor in the hospital, never sent flowers to the funeral, never reached out to offer Ramona help in her time of grief. She hadn't needed to do anything dramatic or public. Their suffering had been quiet, invisible to most of the world, but complete. Her phone buzzed with a text from Nico. confirming the final arrangements for her Paris show. Models, makeup artists, music, lighting, every detail organized with the precision that had made her empire possible. Leora smiled and began planning her next conquest. There were other cities to dominate, other competitors to surpass, other people who needed to learn what happened when they underestimated someone they thought was worthless. The little girl who had been pushed down that embankment was truly dead now. What had grown in her place was something harder, stronger, and infinitely more dangerous than Victor and Ramona Kane could have ever imagined. She had become exactly what she had promised Maeve she would become all those years ago, unstoppable.